We're going to be rusty because this is the first episode that we've recorded in, I think, 8 months?
No shit.
Yeah.
Well, we've done This Week in Bourbon.
This week in
interviews,
Bourbon, but we haven't really interviewed anybody in like 8 months.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's been a while, so.
I hope I don't cry. Like, I'm so I'm fucking honored.
Hey everybody, welcome back. It's another episode of Bourbon Pursuit, the official podcast of bourbon.
Hey,
Kenny Coleman here.
And Ryan Cecil.
And we are talking to our good friend today. This is somebody that we've gotten to know pretty well over probably the past 5 years, I'd say, something like that. I can't remember the first time we met, but I remember one time that really stuck out vividly was when we were going down to Texas. I actually ended up going to another friend's house and doing a presentation for our whiskey there in Pursuit United. And Randy had came up to me and presented me with like the coin, the challenge coin, all this other kind of stuff. And I think that's like when it all really started settling in for me about, how much he's paid attention to us over the years. And, he's been also very kind to say how much we've been a part of his journey too. And I think it'd be fun to kind of talk about that. But honestly, why I had him on the show was because he does have such a touching and moving story. And I would argue that he probably has the largest online whiskey community today.
Active, definitely. I mean, I'm on there 2 or 3 times a day, just seeing what's going on, what people are talking about. It's one of the more engaging, entertaining communities in Facebook. It used to be Bourboner, but Blake
got rid of it.
Blake got rid of it.
This isn't helping Sealbox at all.
Yeah,
right.
But I think my first interaction wasn't in person. After he met you, I think Randy sent me a challenge coin, and then he sent us one of those experiments, I think, of, the whiskey and sunlight. Was that one? Was that from you?
Yeah. For me, yeah.
And we did that together or whatever. That was a lot of fun. So he's been an awesome dude, part of our journey and part of our story. So I'm really stoked to have him on the podcast today.
For sure. And so you've heard him chime in a little bit. So today on the show, we have Randy Sullivan. He is the host of Bourbon Real Talk. He's also the co-founder of the Prideful Goat, which you might have seen in stores around your area as well. So Randy, welcome to the show.
I can't believe I'm here. I am so honored and excited to be here. You guys were literally the first podcast that I ever listened to. And I've literally listened to hundreds of hours of you guys educating me about whiskey. And
now you're going to listen back to this one and be like, oh man.
No. And I went deep. I went like in the way back machine. It's so funny because sometimes people say like, oh, I started listening to your podcast. I started at the beginning. And I'm like, no,
don't do that.
Don't do that.
They're all terrible.
Yeah, start with the current episodes and work your way back. And once it gets weird, just stop.
Once you realize
you get through 1 through 100, it's really bad. Just stop.
No,
the audio quality starts deteriorating. The jokes, the questions are all bad.
Yeah, like it's like where's the pace? There's no pace. It's like he's just rambling. And you guys are literally the only Patreon I've ever subscribed to. So
thank you.
We appreciate that.
Yeah, love you guys. You guys were very instrumental, and Fred as well, in my early journey as a whiskey enthusiast. So I'm so grateful to be here.
Well, it means a lot.
It really does. So I guess the next logical question is when did you go from, hey, I'm going to be a whiskey enthusiast, and I guess maybe a good intro question that we haven't really asked a whole lot of people because your story is a little bit different than most. I mean, do you remember a bottle that got you hooked into this game?
Jack Daniels.
Okay.
Actually, yeah. So my story was I started off in wine, and I didn't drink until I was about 28 years old. I was very actively involved with youth at my church, and I had youth over at the house all the time. And the church was just kind of like, you're only a few years older than a lot of them. Like, they're not going to understand if they're seeing you drink and whatnot. So I didn't really have alcohol around. But once I started having kids of my own and going on vacation.
That's kind of how it goes, right? Yeah. Have kids and you're like, oh man.
No, man.
I need a drink.
And I went to dinner for, I think it was my 28th birthday. And I wanted to order a glass of wine. And the waiter did that thing that pitchers do, or pitchers do when they don't like the call.
They just
shake
sit there
it off.
and they shake their
He
head.
looked at me and he was like, "No, don't order that." And I felt so dumb that I asked my wife to get me a book, and I started reading about wine, and I love the history and all that, but later, I discovered that wine wasn't as shareable as it needed to be to line up with my personality, because I like shared experiences. And wine, this was before Corvin, so you couldn't like just take a sample out of it and share it with somebody. You had to open it up. You're probably going to drink the whole thing. But once I started to discover the shelf life of whiskey and the shareability of whiskey, that really resonated with my spirit and who I am as a person. And I ended up switching over all of my allegiance to bourbon, but my entry into that was just Jack Daniels. There was a point in time where I would go to a bar and I would think about a drink that I had heard somebody order in media somewhere, and I tried all of these different things, and I discovered Jack Daniels is good. And that ended up playing pretty heavily into my story because I had a younger brother that was in the military, and he became kind of the inspiration for a lot of what I've done inside the whiskey world in focusing on creating community and connection. And he had come home from leave, and he was like, "Hey, I heard you drinking a little bit now. I've never gone out and drank with my older brother. Let's have a guys' night out." We went and watched the movie Borat when it was in the theaters.
Very nice.
Very nice.
Elvis.
And
it's just so many good
and
classics.
so we had this great night out. We went and got drinks. We went to the movie. I brought a flask to the movie, which is probably not legal in Texas. And we had this great time, and we left. And he said, "You're too drunk. I can't take you home. Your wife won't let me go out with me
So last
anymore."
time with your brother.
And so he's like, "I'm
One and done.
I gotta sober you up." So we went to Waffle House, and
As one does.
I'm smothered, covered, and chopped, and I had this great experience with the waitress, and a little person pimp came in with 2 full-size prostitutes. I ended up telling the story at my brother's funeral.
This is an amazing story.
Yeah, it was one of my greatest memories in life, and it kind of solidified my connection to whiskey, and it really helped me to understand that whiskey isn't just about the intoxicating effects. There's a communal aspect of whiskey. And I was able to create this really great memory with my brother who, spoiler alert, he ended up dying. And that really is what has drawn me to the spirit, right? Is its connective power. And so it was really Jack Daniels. And after my brother's passing, I got the chance to go to Lynchburg. I did the tour. I am a nerd. I ask a lot of questions. The tour guide was like, "Hey man, what's going on?
He's looking for a job."
He's like, "Why are you so?" And I waited till everyone left, and I said, "All right, well, I'm going to tell you something. It's kind of sad, but we're going to pull it back around." And I explained that was kind of my connection to my brother. So this trip to Lynchburg was a little bit of an homage to him, and for me to get me more connected to the thing that brought me into whiskey. And he made me a Tennessee Squire that day. And for those of you who don't know, Jack Daniels has this kind of pseudo-secret society, very similar to the Maker's Mark Ambassador program, where you get signed up and you're called a Tennessee Squire, and they send you emails and calendars and stuff like that.
Coasters.
And socks. And it just really solidified that relationship. So there's always been a soft spot in my heart for Jack Daniels, and I'm so glad that they have higher proof releases and special releases now that are more alignment with my palate. But I just did the deep dive into Kentucky bourbon, and the rest is kind of history, and you guys have played a huge part in that. And I remember when Fred got added to the show, and I'd been reading his books and all that stuff. So I'm just...
You're like, they're legit now.
Yeah.
It's not just those 2 dumbasses.
Well, I mean, to be honest, at the time, I didn't know anything. So, I was like, oh, to me, y'all were adding credibility to Fred. Now he's a podcaster.
There you go. I like that. Yeah. We should make sure that he puts that on his resume.
Yeah, that's right.
So did Bourbon Real Talk, when did that spawn out? Was that before or after your brother?
That was long after. So
long after.
My
okay. By the way, yeah, feel free to I know
expand on that.
Well, yeah. you glazed over it a little bit, and I know it's a real it's a spot for you, and it means like, and why you grow it, and some of your sign-offs, and just kind of talk about sort of like how that influenced everything that you were doing too.
Yeah, we'll do the sign-off at the end, but the story was my brother was in the Army. He was airborne infantry. He got some injuries during jump school, and he was, your typical hard-charging Army type, guy. And, he drank pretty heavily, and he ended up, unfortunately, honorably discharged, but he was badly addicted to opioids. So by the time he got out of the military, his life really never got back on track. And it was in July of 2014, right when I was getting started in my whiskey journey, he took his own life. And, that was a big shock to me. And I, as anyone who experiences something like that, you go through this whole process of, what happened, and, what could I have done? And, if this had been different, would it have changed the outcome? And, going through all of those thought exercises. But in the end, I decided that after having experienced, communicating with his social circle, and many of them had started to pull away from him because of, he had become erratic and difficult to be around. And I started to realize, like, one of the contributing factors was that he didn't have that community of people around him that cared about him that he once had. And at the same time, I was getting more involved in the whiskey enthusiast world, and I started seeing how whiskey had this tendency to bring people together. And I started researching the history of whiskey and all that. And I believe there's a historical reason why whiskey is more connective than other spirits. And, basically what I learned was that the original whiskeys that were created were about preservation of resources. There were these caloric resources that had been grown. They were at risk of rotting, so they turned it into beer. The beer was at risk of going bad, so they turned it into spirits. And we all kind of see it as this communal thing. And I saw that in person. I went to a bottle share. I went with my friend Rodney, who's an African-American guy, and we sat down at a 4-person table, and there was a Mexican guy sitting to the right of me and an Indian guy across from me, and Rodney is to my left. And I was drinking some really amazing, like, vintage spirit, and I don't even remember what it was, but I loved it, and I was talking great about it. And the guy next to me said, "Hey, can I try it?" And the glass ended up being passed all the way around the table. We didn't even know each other, the other two guys, and here we are sharing out of the same glass, drinking out of the same glass, and really connecting. And I thought, man, I want to do something with this. Like, I think there's an opportunity here to make people's lives better around this hobby. And so that was kind of the jumping off point. So that was probably in about 2018, if I had to guess. I didn't even know what a podcast was at that time. And
we're still figuring it out.
Yeah.
Neither did,
I'm not sure I know yet.
neither did the distilleries.
And so I ended up being introduced to the concept of podcasts, and immediately I start looking for bourbon. I find you guys being the #1 bourbon podcast, started listening, and I started doing like live videos in local Facebook groups, like explaining the difference between cask strength, barrel proof, and full proof, right? And, just little questions that would come up. And somebody said, "Have you ever thought about doing a podcast?" And I was like, no, I guess I'm kind of creating the content. I'm just putting it in Facebook instead of on YouTube. And so I started researching it, and I started recording at the end of 2018. And then I launched my podcast in May of 2019.
Congratulations.
Yeah. And so I'm over 300 full-length episodes, but I've got over 500, because I do reviews and stuff that are not full-length. So I think I have over 500 content pieces on YouTube now. A little over 62 or 3,000 subscribers on YouTube. Probably 6,000 subscribers on audio.
Yeah.
But as you know, we don't get those numbers, but just running the averages, it's probably around 6,000. And then a 32,000 member Facebook group that is all positive and troll free.
That And that's the amazing part.
That is the amazing part.
I mean, honestly, there's a lot of things that we can say you've accomplished so far, but I think putting that community is probably the top of the pinnacle, the pyramid of what you've been able to build. Yeah, I mean, seriously, getting a few guys sitting around a microphone talking about whiskey, I mean, that's pretty, like, the bar is pretty low. Getting 32,000 people all in a group and not one person's allowed to say anything negative in whiskey, that's like ungodly.
Well, and it's funny because I had this vision for a long time. And so I'm actually here doing a single barrel pick of Pursuit spirits for a whiskey club that I started a year before I started the podcast called Someone Say Whiskey. It is a nationwide group, but we're about 90% in North Texas. We got about 6,000 or 16,000 members. And I kind of got my feet wet in learning about social media environments and, what you can do through mediation what you can do through moderation and what you can't. And I had a vision to build a wider kind of a discussion platform, but I believed that with proper moderation that you could keep out those negative voices. And I started talking with people about it, and they thought I was crazy. They were like,
this is not possible.
This is not possible. Like, have you been in any whiskey forums? It's just filled with people telling each other to kill themselves because they don't like the same whiskey. You know what I mean? And
it's like, you like Eagle Rare? Yeah,
right.
Get out of here.
Yeah, like,
always judging. Look at the bear.
It truly is.
And so what I noticed is that in a active Facebook group, there are about 10% of the people actually contribute to the content. And of those 10%, or of those 10%, about 10% of those people create 80 to 90% of your content. So you're talking about a super active 1% of a total membership base. And so, like in Someone Say Whiskey, we have 16,000 members. If you look, about 1,600 people interact on the page in some way on a regular basis, but only about 150 to 200 people are the ones that are creating the majority of the posts. They're doing the majority of the commenting. And what that made me realize was, if you curated who that 1% was that you gave a voice to in your space, you could actually control the overall vibe of the community. But the opposite's true. If you don't curate it, it's very easy for someone to take over your culture and change it because it's such a small percentage of the people that are participating. And a lot of people thought I was crazy, but I ended up doing it. I formed the community, and we put in a lot of rules, and sometimes people come in and go like, the freedom of speech and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, the Constitution doesn't apply to my private Facebook group. And if you want to say those things, this probably isn't the right space for you, and you're free to start your own group and make that part of your culture. That's fine. But I realized that if you're getting your content from only 10% of your membership, there's 90% of people that are lurkers that would maybe be contributors if you made the environment safe for them. And that was kind of my goal. Was to create a whiskey environment where people could discuss things, share their honest opinions, but do it in a way that didn't cause drama and conflict to flare up. And so we have a few rules. One of them is that you don't share a dissenting opinion on a post that someone didn't ask for your opinion. So if someone comes in and goes, I really love Eagle Rare, you don't have to tell them how basic their palate is unless they said, what do you think about Eagle Rare? And then there's a second rule that if you're going to share an opinion, do it in a way that is constructive for the average member in the group. Like, don't say Eagle Rare is a drain pourer and it's hot garbage. Say, when I taste Eagle Rare, I taste this thing that I don't like, and here's what I don't like about it.
It's a lot of wordsmithing is what it comes down to.
Basically, right. But that's an art.
Don't be a dick. It's
that's an art that we've lost in modern society. And I think that social media has done a lot to give a platform to people who have really negative world outlooks. And I wondered whether or not, if you took the time to communicate clearly with people about how they could interact with one another and it be positive. And now we have this really vibrant community that's got super liberal people with super conservative people and transgender people and Christian people and all of these people who in any other environment, they would probably not see eye to eye on a lot of things. But when we teach them how to focus on the important things about community and whiskey, they're all interacting together, and it's just this beautiful, harmonious thing that, quite honestly, I'm still a little bit surprised at.
It is amazing. Like, my favorite thing is seeing like the relationships that start there and they build outside of it. And then like people, you know, just going out, you know, Roger Schaefer comes to mind. He's one of our ambassadors, but he is like always looking, if somebody hasn't had something or wants to try it, he sends them samples. And I know people, you know, in that have done that for others. Like they, you know, because it's hard to get all these bottles in certain locations of the country. And so it's just really like a real nice sharing, giving community. It's like really refreshing to go there. Like that's why I enjoy going there, because it's not just like you're a dumbass because you like XYZ or, or that's a drain pour or this and that. So
and Pappy's dropping in this state.
Yeah.
Right. And I try to, I try to let people know, like, if it's not for you, that's okay. But there is somebody in this community that probably loves it. Right. And so never drain pour anything. Rehome the bottle.
Rehome it.
Right. Make a friend. Right. Find somebody that has something that you would like that likes this, and y'all get to know each other, and really, you know, sharing is caring, and that's what it's all about. And we've done some things to help kind of foster that. You made mention of the challenge coins that I gave y'all.
Yeah. Kind of talk about the sort of like the beginning of that and why you came up with challenge coins and why that was sort of like a way to get people more entrenched in the community.
So do you guys remember when there was that mid-air collision between the like B-2 bomber and another vintage plane at a Texas air show like last year or year before?
I can't.
It made nationwide news. There was a mid-air collision and everyone died. 1 year before that, I was at that air show. There was a cigar fundraiser event for charity, and I had donated some stuff, and the guy that runs it is a buddy of mine. He does the podcast Texas Cigar Roadshow, and he invited me out, and I actually sat at the table with all of the pilots of that bomber that passed away 1 year later. In fact, I shared with them my whiskey, the Prideful Goat. And so the significant thing that came out of that night, one, I met those guys and they were all amazing and nice and whatnot. But they were not heavy drinkers. And so after a few minutes, like the conversation slowed down and I started looking for another table to go to. And I walk up and there's this table and there's this gigantic Hispanic bald dude, like he's huge. And in front of him is what looks like a WWE like wrestling belt on the table. And so I come walking up, and I've been drinking, and
as all good stories,
right?
Yeah.
And I walk up to him and I go, "Hey, man," and he's like, "What's up?" And I go, "What the fuck is that?" And he's like, "That's my cigar club." And I go, "You got a whole ass cigar club?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I go, "I got a whole ass whiskey club because no one told you couldn't do it, right?" And he goes, "Basically." And I was like, "I got a brand of whiskey. Do you want to try it?" And he goes, "Hell yeah." And I go, "All right, I'll be right back." So I go out and I get my bottle share bag and I bring it over and I'm getting my Prideful Goat bottles out and I'm meeting he and his friends. And there's a dude sitting next to him that's got a man bun, which I'm sorry if you have a man bun. I mean, no offense, but I'm not a huge fan.
Okay.
And
it's not the haircut for you.
It's not. Yeah. And
we don't allow trolling of man buns in this podcast.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
and there's another guy. There's a black dude that's sitting at the table, and they're all in this cigar club together. And I'm talking to all three of them, and we're having a good time. We're shooting the crap. We're making jokes, and the guy with the man bun says like, "Hey, this other dude, I think the guy's name was Mondo," and he's like, "Mondo's son has long hair like me," and he said, "You wouldn't believe it, but Mondo used to have like a long hair and a ponytail before it was cool." And I looked at the dude with the man bun. And I said loud enough for his friends to hear. I said, "Hey, man, I don't know if you know this, but it's not cool now." And they just thought that was hilarious. They all fell out laughing. And the guy reached into his pocket, Mondo did, and he got out the silver coin and he handed it to me. And I said, "What is this?" And I'd never seen a challenge coin up to this point. And he goes, "Oh, that's a challenge coin for the members of my cigar club." And I said, "So this makes me a member?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "So what? Like, if you call in the middle of the night, I show up with a shovel and don't ask questions?" And he was like, "Pretty much." And I was like, "I don't know why, but I'm in."
Yeah.
Like it made me feel like a part of something. And he got out his coin, and his was gold, and the guy with the long hair, his was gold, and then the other dude, his was silver. I said, "Well, why are ours silver and yours is gold?" And he goes, "Oh, these are just for me and my 2 consiglieres. Everybody else has silver." And that gave me the idea of like different colors for different things, you know? And so after I felt that really connected, you know, experience, when I started building a community, I thought, I want to help curate the culture by identifying the people that are engaging in the behaviors that I think are good for community, and then I'm going to reward that. And so we created a series of challenge coins that are various colors. There's one that you get for hitting the algorithm in Facebook for being a top contributor, but the other ones are various colors, and we don't tell people what you have to do to earn them, because we're not trying to pay people.
Sounds like a secret society. It's just,
Yeah.
We'll tell you when the time is right.
Well, when you get your coin, the back of the paper actually tells you what you did to get the coin. But it also tells you not to tell other people, right? Because
is it like a graduation status, like karate? You go from yellow belt, blue belt, black belt, or is it like
no? In this case, you could be a black belt that doesn't have a white belt. It's possible.
Okay,
right? Not likely, but possible. And so what we did was we said, if you're doing something that creates community, if you're doing something that creates connections, it could be something as simple as like what Roger does all the time and sending samples to somebody to try things that they haven't tried before. But it could be running a fundraiser. It could be doing a local community meetup. It could be any number of things, right? And there's somebody we have about 150 posts a day. And so there's somebody who
really,
yeah,
man. All right, so I
believe that.
So I see 10% of the 10%, right?
Right, yeah. And so somebody looks at every single post every day, and they identify when somebody has done something that builds community, and we have a system that it goes into a spreadsheet, and we find those people's addresses and we mail them a challenge coin. And so we've got black, red, blue, and white. And then there's a green challenge coin that's for being a top contributor, if you will. And that coin is different. It's very obvious that you got that it says you're a top contributor, right?
And it's a big deal to people. They love.
Some people love it. In fact, it was such a big deal. There was somebody, I gave you guys white coins.
You weren't supposed to say
that there are the white coin is
nobody knows why though,
is the rarest. Those are the hardest to get.
We're consigliere,
and there was basically y'all are OGs. And there was somebody who wanted a white coin real bad, and he was giving away. I tried to guesstimate how much he was giving away, like $5,000 to $10,000 worth of whiskey a month.
Holy crap!
Like he was just going bananas, and everybody loved this guy. But
I remember that.
But I wouldn't give him a white coin because he hadn't done the thing to earn it, right? And he ended up leaving and starting another group. And I let all that happen. I knew it was going to happen. I let it happen, and I lost $2,500 a month in Patreon support when he left. He took that many people with him. And so that's how committed I am to the overall purpose, is that I was willing to lose, whatever the math on that is. It's, $30,000 a year in income to protect the integrity of the coin that I gave you guys, right? Because it's that important to me that the mission of the community be first. It was never about money.
Little did he know, he could just probably text Ryan, and Ryan probably get rid of it for $500, right?
Sorry, we don't contribute $2,500. But yeah, it seems like, with you, you're very inquisitive, but you're also very like thoughtful and long-term thinker. Where do you get that from? Like, was that something you've just learned over the years or just inherited? Like,
I don't talk about this a lot, but when I was growing up, my father was in prison for most of my life. I think last year was the year that he had hit the mark where he was out of prison longer than he had not been since I'd been born. And so the abridged version, my father was Heisenberg, basically he was like a top meth manufacturer. Like people would bring their chemicals to him and have him make the meth because apparently he was really good at it. And when I was like later in life, like in my 20s, I met somebody that knew my dad like back in the day, and the guy like got all nostalgic and he's like, your dad made the best meth. And I'm like, this is the weirdest conversation, ever. But because I grew up with, my father being in prison, I became very observant, and I would watch other people's lives, and I would try to identify people who were generating things in their life that they wanted, and I would try to identify what they were doing that was producing that result so that I could emulate it, because I didn't have a father to watch. I didn't have those kinds of influences. And so I became super, super observant in watching other people. And that is certainly translated into how I live my life inside the whiskey world, right? I spend enough time that I now literally have a social anxiety disorder trying to think about like how people are going to perceive what it is that I'm doing in the public and how it's going to impact my overall vision and what I'm doing to try and honor my late brother and all those things. And so that's why. Like I never really thought about it, but when you ask the question, like that's why.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and two, you like with your content, you're very like, it's like you want to know and understand why things are in the whiskey world. And I think that's why people in the community, in your videos, like I love watching your videos because you really like get to the root of like everything. Like you go deep, like really deep.
And I love getting nerdy. Unfortunately, the YouTube algorithm doesn't always reward that.
Short and fast.
You need listicles and bourbon hunting videos and those types of things.
Yeah, I've got a it's so funny, like having conversations with people about like, they want me to do a video and they know it's going to get them some marketing promotion or whatever. And I go, okay, yeah, but we got to name it this crazy thing or no one's going to watch it. And they're like, well, I don't want that to be on my video. And I'm like, do you want people to see it or not? Like, I don't like, unfortunately,
you gotta have some stupid YouTube thumb
clickbait thing with the thumbnail.
Our faces making something like random. Like, I don't know how'd this get there.
Yeah, and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, I make honest content, and I think about what were the elements that because I'd listen to you all's podcast, and there'd be little nuggets that I'd pull out, right, and I'd go, if I could make a video that was just the nuggets that I was looking for, what would that look like? And so that's what I try to do and I'm not smart I'm average intelligence. I don't even have that great a memory recall, but I'm a decent researcher. And I feel like I'm okay at identifying like these are the important elements that if somebody spent all the time doing all the research I just did, these are the things that they'd want to walk away with. So I try and condense that down as best as possible. And I love history, so I always throw in some historical elements in there, just a little bit of information to make it interesting for those individuals that are interested in history. But it's also not for everybody. So sometimes people will comment like, oh, just tell me what the whiskey tastes like or whatever. And I'm like, there's other channels for that.
Yeah,
like,
you can fast forward to the end.
Yeah,
we'll give you the nuggets.
I put the chapters in there. I told you where the tasting notes were. Yeah. Just skip the part where I'm talking about the history of the brand, right?
So you mentioned it. Yeah, exactly. You mentioned a few times the Prideful Goat. You kind of sprinkled in. How did, going influencer Facebook community, now you have the Prideful Goat, which I believe was
with Chris Hart.
Our friend Chris Hart, yeah. So talk about how you got introduced to Chris and now you're in the whiskey business too.
Because he is wearing a shirt, by the way, that has a Texas A&M logo with a goat on
with
it.
a goat,
That's right.
yeah. If you start a whiskey brand called the Prideful Goat, people start buying goat things for you. So
goat's milk, goat's butter, goat's chapstick.
I went to Texas A&M. My daughter's a sophomore, and my son just got accepted. So I am a Texas A&M fan.
Congratulations.
I am aware of all of the dumb Aggie jokes. I feel like they're fair. It's fine. But no, Christopher was kind of a luminary in the whiskey world in Texas. He ran, the Houston Whiskey Social. He ran Houston Bourbon Society. And I don't even remember exactly how I was introduced to him. I think I probably reached out to him at some point. And we were growing Someone Say Whiskey in North Texas. And in the whiskey world, there are a lot of
turf wars?
Almost, teenage girl type beefs and drama. And he kind of became the mediator in some of that to try and keep everything calm in the Texas whiskey scene. And I think that's probably how I originally met him. But he and I hit it off. I recognized that he was a pretty brilliant guy, and he was a few steps ahead of me in both the podcasting world and in the growing of a community. And there was a point at which I got invited to the Texas Whiskey Association meeting that was at Giant Texas Distillers, which is the largest distillery west of the Mississippi. They have one of the former a decommissioned still from one of the large producers here in Kentucky, and then 2 different sets of pot stills, and they can do about 7,000 barrels a month, which is a pretty large capacity for outside of Kentucky. And I went there. I had watched an episode of Chris's about that distillery. I knew that it had been an Uncle Ben's rice processing plant that had been built in a public-private partnership between the U.S. government and Uncle Ben's to supply rice to the Allied forces during World War II. That had been shut down due to union disputes, and that this individual had bought it and turned it into his coffee business. And then he peeled some of the space off and started this distillery. And that's where the Texas Whiskey Association meeting was. So I went there. I met this really handsome Spanish guy.
You get away with meeting all these Spanish people.
Yeah, and I noticed that the staff were being different around him, and I started to put 2 and 2 together, and I was like, oh, I think this guy owns this distillery. His name's Carlos de Aldecoa, and he imports between 30 and 40% of the coffee into the United States. And he had the taxation laws changed in the state of Texas, and now Texas is the largest importer of coffee. Used to be Miami. And just this really dynamic guy, lots of resources. He actually, the night I met him, I was commenting about how impressive the distillery was, and he said, "Have you never been on a tour?" And this was the second coolest moment of my entire life. He had told the bar manager to get me a pour of this 15-year Kentucky straight bourbon that he had just sourced because he figured I'd like it. And he goes, "Get him a pour. I'm going to take Randy on a tour." And the guy goes, "Hey, do you see those 2 girls waiting at the bar?" And the owner says, "Yes." And he goes, "Well, they've been waiting to go on a tour too. Can you take them with you?" And he looked at him and he goes, "No. That's your job. Come on, Randy." And I was like, what? This guy showing me attention. And that was the night that the Prideful Goat was born, because I love that 15-year Kentucky straight bourbon.
I remember. We had this much of a bottle left.
Much left, yeah. And I asked him for a single barrel, and he said, sure. And then I called Christopher and I said, "Hey, man, I found this 15-year Kentucky straight. HBS should do a barrel pick." I reached out to some other local whiskey clubs. I had 4 or 5 clubs set up to do single barrels. And then we found out that they didn't get it in barrels. They got it in totes. And it was 330 gallons or 1,300 bottles. And that's when I called Christopher and said, hey, we're not going to be able to do all these single barrels, but what if we did one statewide release for everybody? Because it's such a cool thing to have access to. And Christopher, being the businessman that he is, he was like, what if we created our own label instead of just doing a tater sticker? And I asked the distillery, they said yes, we did it. That first release sold out in about 3 hours. the distillery was like, holy crap, you sold 1,300 bottles in 3 hours. Can you do it again? We're like, yeah. And so
challenge accepted.
Did a second release, but now people knew what it was. So it sold out in about 45 minutes. And then after that, the distillery reached out to Christopher and I and offered us a ownership position and said like, hey, let's build this brand. And I'm still trying to decide whether or not that was the dumbest decision I've ever made or not. So,
because you still have a day job too, right?
Yeah. I'm a realtor. I do residential real estate in Dallas, a little bit in Houston, but that's how I pay the bills. It's despite the rumors to the contrary, there's not a lot of money in whiskey podcasting. Right. So. No, I am unable to survive even with Patreon support. I have to make money someplace else. So.
I do know this as part of one of your sign-offs. Be like, if you want to help us, not only can you support our Patreon, but if you want to buy a house, come talk to me.
Come talk to me, yeah.
I'll be more than happy to.
You know, it's funny because I forget who, I think it was Kylie Jenner was named like the youngest female billionaire, which is actually a lie. It wasn't her, but they put her on Time Magazine. And that was when I kind of had the aha moment. It's like, I know how to talk to people about whiskey. And it turns out like Kylie Jenner sells lots of makeup, but she doesn't do makeup tutorials, right? Like you don't have to be known for the thing that you make your money doing, right?
Yeah.
And I thought, well, maybe I'll just help people get connected to whiskey. And if some of those people decide to hire me as a realtor, it'll be great. And that's worked out for me and my family. So I don't have to directly monetize off of the podcasts per se. So
see, Ryan, you missed out.
I know.
You should have been saying, and by the way, if you also want to help support Ryan, you need to go ahead and contact Go Green Lawn Services to
only if you're in the Louisville metro area.
Yeah.
That kind of limits our audience.
It's a little limiting.
Yeah. Unless you started like a lead generation business nationwide and sell those leads off.
Yeah.
That's what Dave Ramsey did.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, Dave Ramsey makes millions of dollars per year off real estate leads because he's advertising nationwide.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
But he literally got licensed as a real estate agent so that he could legally collect referral fees.
Yeah, he does that for financial advisors.
Yeah. So you could have done that for lawn service. Some off those lawn service leads.
Dumb.
We should have had this brainstorming here years ago.
I like to make money the hard way.
Yeah. I like to work hard and not make money.
Exactly. It's the whiskey game.
Yeah, we all chose that.
How's been, because people ask this to me all the time. They're like, how has it changed having a brand, your enthusiasm about the category?
That's actually a pretty fair question. I drink more tequila than I used to. There is a point at which it kind of becomes redundant. Like how many times can you try George C. Stagg or, William Lee Weller? They're amazing every time. You know what I mean? For me, for a long time, it's not really been about the spirit category as much as it is about the human interaction that's associated with it. So that's really what drives me. But yeah, I mean, I can smell MGP whiskey from across the room now. And, there's these talk offs that you do when you're at whiskey festivals or you're doing a whiskey dinner and all of that stuff kind of becomes repetitive. For the audience, it's the first time they're hearing it.
Right.
But for you're like, oh my God, I've said this 100 times. I can literally fall asleep and the speech is going to be the same. So there is a little bit of monotony that in some ways takes the fun out of the spirit itself, but it never takes the fun out of the human connection.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of why that's become the larger focus for me. I have 800 bottles. I've got, all the Van Winkles and B-Tax and all that stuff. And I never drink those. And it's not because they don't taste good to me. It's because those are more important for creating an experience with somebody who it means something special to them to have the opportunity to have it, And so that's really what I've focused my collection on. I drink more Wild Turkey 101 and Knob Creek 9-year than anything else because they're in benchmark foolproof. I mean, they're all delicious and easy to find and inexpensive. And, if I'm just having a drink in the house or a cocktail, I don't have to have anything fancy. But, people matter. Whiskey really doesn't matter as much as some people would like to think.
Yeah, that's what I love the category, and why I think it's still going to be here for a long time is because there's no other spirit that has a community like the bourbon community.
No, not yet. I mean, I've seen some growth in the tequila world and whatnot, but in rum, I've seen some growth in rum. There was a little bit of push for cognacs and armagnacs for a little bit, but no, bourbon. I think the community is here to stay, and that's really the most important thing for me when you think about that category is, basically what you saw from Freddie Johnson in the documentary Neat, that story about him sitting down and drinking a pappy that Julian gave him with his family. And then, not too long after that, he lost some of those family members, but he has those memories forever. And so when I finally got to sit down with Freddie Johnson, I told him that seeing all that inspired me. And I have a saying now that there's no such thing as an empty bottle of whiskey, because it's either filled with memories or it's filled with liquid.
I like that.
And that's what I try, every time I see a little bit more headspace in that whiskey bottle, I like to remember, who did I create that with? What did we talk about? What did that day mean to me? And that's what makes whiskey exciting for me.
I feel like we got to get a drink now.
Yeah.
Let's put a memory in one of those bottles.
Yeah. That's so touching. I mean, Randy, to be honest, like that's what I loved about your personality, your mission, your drive, and what you're trying to build, because I think it's truly unique in this world. The fact that you're trying to build something that's really community focused, that doesn't have trolls. You've got your own brand, you're doing your own thing, and you're really trying to build it out. I guess as you've been building out your brand, what has been the hardest thing that you've had to overcome as a part of that, knowing that we're also on the same side of the table with you, trying to figure out how do we navigate the waters of marketing versus cola application versus blah, blah, blah. Like, what was one of the biggest hurdles that you thought about coming into this? And
probably the biggest hurdle that I dealt with was when that individual came in and was being so generous, and on the surface it seemed to be
kind of genuine, maybe
somebody who really was fully embracing the culture. But I started getting contacted from individuals who were formerly very connected and engaged in the community, saying that there was so much focus and attention being put on that individual and the groups of people that were part of his inner circle that they didn't feel like there was space for them anymore. And I mean, that was probably the hardest thing that I'd had to deal with in community building, is to try to go to an individual and going, you're too much of what I said to be. You're so much of what I've said to be that now other people feel like there's no space for them. And those were very difficult times to navigate. Sleepless nights, discussing things with my wife, and
because all those Facebook dollars were just rolling in, you didn't know how to stop it, right?
Well, and in all fairness, like I said, I did end up losing, $30,000 a year in support, and that was the difference between it kind of being something that was pseudo worth my time to certainly not worth the time, energy, and effort. That was a very difficult thing to deal with. And then the other thing is the overarching thing that I've struggled with the most is people assuming negative intent and then telling me about it, where, I see myself as this guy that's like, I love and miss my brother, and I want to help other people have this kind of connection, and I love whiskey, and I think it tastes great, and I have all these fond memories of sharing whiskey with people. And then somebody comes along and goes, oh, well, you're only doing all of this because you're trying to find a way to profit off your brother's suicide. And to hear those kinds of negative comments, and I've heard worse. I've heard things about my kids being raped, and just things that you couldn't imagine that anyone would say. And it's part of the problem with the internet. And I struggled with that so much that the first time I got to have a private conversation with Fred, we're recording, but I ended up asking him more about, like, how do you deal with this? Because, like, I'm wanting to quit. Like, how do you deal with this negative feedback and these people who you think you're trying to do something good for them in their lives, and for whatever reason, they hate you and want bad things to happen to you and your family. Like, how do you deal with that? And we had this really long conversation, and Fred actually shared something that was so personal that when we got done recording, he said, hey, I'm not trying to dictate to you what your content looks like, but I said some things that also involve my family. Would you be okay if I talk with them first before you publish it? And I said, it's deleted. And he was like, no, I don't want you to feel like you have to do that. And I said, man, I'm going to be honest, that was for me. My audience doesn't need to hear that. And so, you guys and Fred and, others, or even listen to Joe Rogan, and he's like, don't read the comments, I've really, really struggled with trying to find a way to deal with that negative feedback that you get when I'm like, it seems so obvious to me that I'm just this average Joe that had a microphone that no one could shut up, and I'm trying to do good things. Like, why hate me? Why want bad things to happen to me? Why wish bad things on my family? But that's been difficult. But I have gotten to a place, and it was a weird transition for me to just go, okay, well, some people's opinions don't need to be listened to. And then I struggled like, well, are you becoming arrogant because you're not considering everybody's opinion equally? If you're willing to dismiss somebody on their face just because they say something that you don't like, are you becoming an arrogant person who thinks more highly of yourself than you should? Are you becoming the thing they're accusing you of? And so that's been a real struggle for me. And how, I know y'all had to have also gone through that. How have y'all?
I mean, as Ryan always said, the negative comments are always the most loudest, and you try not to focus your efforts and your energy on it, but it's hard to get it out of the back of your head. I mean, there's still one I remember, an Apple review we got. God, it had been almost 9 years ago, and somebody said these guys just shoehorn politics in every conversation. Ever since then, I was like, all right, we're not gonna talk about politics. But those are the kind of things that, I mean, I guess thankfully it hasn't been as bad as some of the things that you had mentioned. But for the most part, I still read the comments. I still feel like it's a sounding board that I need to be involved with to be able to figure out how do we make the show better, or how do we address some of the things we might have missed. But for the most part, anything that's negative, I just try to think, going back to either our goals or our mission, or what are we about and what are we trying to work towards, and trying to stick to that Northern Star.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's what I do.
Yeah. It's like you can read 10 positive ones and you get one negative one. Especially like the content stuff, it doesn't bother me as much because I know what we're trying to do, and people can assume stuff, but the whiskey stuff I take to heart because we put our heart and soul, our life, our money, everything into it. And when somebody just like, it's fine if you don't like it, but when you like just say something negative, it sticks with me and it chaps my ass and like ruminates. But like, I don't know, I've gotten better at it where I can just be like, there was 10 positive ones and there's one, like focus on the 10. Right. So that's what I try to do.
I have the advantage that because so much of my life's work, because we have a 501c3 suicide prevention and intervention nonprofit called Live Stay Project that I started to honor my late brother. And so we do a lot of fundraiser things. We probably, between Someone Say Whiskey and Bourbon Real Talk community, we probably raise $100,000 to $150,000 a year for nonprofits. Like, we do a lot of
That's amazing.
Positive work. And I have this distinct advantage that, yes, I can read the comments where somebody says, you're garbage and you deserve this or whatever. But I also get private messages of people who I stopped their suicide plan. Right. And so those are the things that I try to hang on to, but I also am very cautious and try to be aware of, if somebody says something nice in the comments, don't take that too seriously. Just like if somebody says something that's hateful, don't take that too seriously. I still try to ask myself, do they have a point? Right? Like, is there something that I could do differently or better based on this feedback, even if they're just being hateful, but that's kind of been my way of dealing with it. But there have been those days where I'm just like emotionally devastated by something that some person said or emailed me. And my wife was like, just let it go. And I'm like, I'm not trying to be that arrogant guy that wants to only believe the good things too, So that's definitely been my largest struggle.
Well, to be fair, when you're on this side of the microphone, you don't know who you're talking, what in life impacting decisions they're making based on what we're delivering. We've talked to people that they've changed some of their career paths because of it, but I can't say that we're, it's very admirable what you're doing to say that you're literally saving lives. And so thank you for everything that you're doing as a part of that. It means probably a lot to a lot of people. And it's just, I'm glad you get those few nuggets of people that do say something to you. And it does. It means a lot. So thank you for all the work that you do when it comes to that as well.
I appreciate that. And what I tell myself, and I assume this is true, is that there is so much of a taboo feel around mental health, especially for men. We feel like we have to be strong. We're not allowed to talk about our struggles. And so I tell myself that if I've, been reached out to by, 7, 8, 9 people who told me this was my suicide plan and I stopped because of something you said, and this is why, that there has to be more of other people that I've helped that just didn't feel comfortable reaching out or sharing that story. And so I try to build that up in my mind that I'm having a big impact so that I don't quit, because there are days that I want to. But, trying to keep it positive and focus on the little things, not to put too much pressure on it, but just be able to sit down and have a real conversation and have a pour with somebody and make those memories and let the chips fall where they may.
Very sure. Well
said.
Randy, I want to say thank you again for coming on the show today. I hope we lived up to your expectations of coming on Bourbon Pursuit finally.
He's like, it's a letdown.
It's a letdown.
No.
Down again.
No. And do you mind if I close out the show?
I was going to actually suggest that, to let us do our little closing and then let you do your final sign off. How
Sure.
about that?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Sure. Well, like I said, thank you again, Randy, for coming on the show. Join Bourbon Community Real Talk. Subscribe to his podcast over at Bourbon Real Talk. Go buy a bottle of Prideful Goat. I can't say much more than thank you for everything that you've done, be able to come on the show today, your friendship over the years, everything like that. Obviously, we love bouncing ideas and things off each other. So it's been great to be able to do that. Not only do you follow what he wants to do, follow everything Bourbon Pursuit does, bourbonpursuit.com. Sign up for the newsletter. Every single past archive episode, everything is on that, but make sure you go and check that out as well.
Awesome. And I realized as I started to do my podcast that one day I started doing the sign off. And my wife said, it's weird. Like, no one knows why you're saying what you're saying. People are not used to hearing a stranger say these things to them. And I mentioned earlier that after my brother's passing, I found out that a lot of his friends had started to pull away from him and that he needed those connections and social connections. And I think everybody needs that. And so I started the podcast to help get people connected to whiskey. And I figured whiskey will do the job and get people connected to others. But in that connection, I did see the negativity we discussed. And it made me want to start my own forum that wouldn't have that negativity. But it also encouraged me that if there's all of these strangers out there that are showing hate to people online, there's nothing that keeps me from showing love to people out there online, even though I don't really know them. And I do truly feel like this connection to the average person until they give me a reason not to. And so I felt like it was sincere and honest for me to end the show the same way. And that's this. And if you woke up this morning and you're unsure whether or not anyone loved you, just know that I love you. And I appreciate the opportunity of being on here. Thank you, guys.
We love you too, Randy.
Yeah.
Buy a house.
And buy a house.
No, I'm kidding.
Well, cheers, everybody.
Thanks, man.
Thank you again.
Yeah. Toodles.
Wow. I did it.
Yeah,
Did it.
it's fun.
Good job, man.